All right, everybody. In this video, we are going to be starting lesson 11, or rather, sorry, booklet 11, but lesson 1. And that lesson is on terms and terminology. So we're going to be continuing with algebra in this unit, but we are going to take it up a notch in terms of difficulty. Instead of adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing numbers, now we will be adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing variables. Now, this first lesson is just focused on different terminology, different keywords that you need to know because I'm going to be using them often throughout the entire booklet. So let's start with the idea of variables. Now, a variable is not a number, but it is a symbol. Now, that symbol is usually represented with a letter, right? Such as X is a very common variable that we use. Now, what this means is it is a number that we haven't found or hasn't been revealed yet. So this X could be the number 5, it could be the number 100, it could be the number -2. We don't know yet. So we use a letter as a placeholder of sorts. So we can put that into an equation, and later when we do find out what that number is, we can replace it if that's what we want to do. So let's get started. A variable is any symbol standing in for a numerical value that hasn't been revealed yet. There could be 1, 2, or as many as you want, up to an infinite number of values for any given variable. So let's start talking about new terminology, and we're going to use this guy right here, 7h to the power of 5, to associate with this terminology. So a variable is a symbol, usually a letter that is a stand-in for an unknown value. In this case, our variable is h. Okay? So the next definition is a coefficient. A coefficient is the number that is in front of any variable. In this case, the coefficient would be the number in front of the variable h, and that number is 7. We call that the coefficient. Now, it's important that you realize the relationship here. This number and this variable that are right next to each other, they're actually being multiplied by each other. So we're starting to get into an area of mathematics where we're going to stop using the x for multiplication. But what's happening here is this is 7 times h to the power of 5. Now, here's the problem, right? X could be its own variable. So this is confusing because I don't know if you're multiplying or I don't know if this is a variable. So we stop using x to show that we're multiplying. That is why I have this diagram 7h to the power of 5. And when a number and a variable are right next to each other, you assume that they're being multiplied by each other. The last definition that you need to know is the exponent. Now, the exponent is the raised number above and behind a number or variable. So in this case, the exponent would be this little 5 that is in what we call the superscript, right? So it's up top. And that is our exponent. Okay. Now, what that exponent means is that we're taking the h because it's attached to the h, right? So what that exponent means is we're taking the h and we're multiplying it by itself 5 times. So h, the variable, to the exponent of 5 is equal to h 5 times, which means that we're multiplying h by itself 5 times. But remember, we don't want to use that x anymore to represent multiplication. So if I want to show that h is being multiplied by itself 5 times, I just put it directly next to each other. Okay? Right? Another example, if I want you to write, for example, 5 times 4, instead of using that multiplication, you can write it like this, 5 and then a dot 4. That also means multiplication. That's acceptable. Or you can use brackets, right? This right here means 5 times 4. That's also acceptable. But I want you to stop using x to represent multiplication. Anyways, we have our 3 different definitions here. We have the coefficient, we have the variable, and we have the exponent, where the variable is the letter, the coefficient is the number that is being multiplied by the letter, you put it behind, and the exponent is the number in the top right. Now, all of this together is called a term. A term is the number, the coefficient, that is, the variable, and the exponent all together. A term is a combination of numbers and the variable being multiplied together. It's everything. Okay? So that's the basics of this lesson. We're not really going to do any math. It's just introducing the new terminology and the new way that we are multiplying things together. So in these next examples, we want to state the variable, the coefficient, and the exponent. Now, I am going to use shorthand. I am going to use V for variable, C for coefficient, and E for exponent, okay? Now, in this first example, we have X as our letter. That's our variable, okay? Whatever letter you see, that's your variable. And remember, that X doesn't mean multiplication. That X is a variable. It could be any number. We just don't know what it is yet. The coefficient is the number that is behind the variable. In this case, that is -2. Remember, what's happening here is the -2 is being multiplied to the x. You can represent that using a dot if you want, but just the fact that the number and the variable are connected means that it's multiplication. Now, the thing about this question is we actually don't see the exponent. There's nothing here on top of the x. Now, there is a rule to deal with this. When you don't see the exponent, that means that the exponent is 1. And the reason why we don't write the exponent of 1 is that mathematically it just doesn't make a difference, right? Remember that the exponent means how many times you multiply something by itself. So let's say I had 5 to the exponent of 2, that would be 5 times 5. Note that I'm using my new way for multiplication. If I had 5 to the power of 1, that's just 5 once, right? Nothing has changed. I don't need to multiply anything, and that's why we don't really need to write that exponent at all. So in other words, if you don't see an exponent, then that exponent is 1. It's just invisible because you don't need to write it. All right. Now in this second example, I am again going to use V for variable, C for coefficient, and E for exponent. The variable here is the letter, and that letter is Y. I don't see a coefficient. I don't see any number before y. I'm going to come back to that later. The exponent is pretty easy. That's this guy right here. That's 5. Now, just like the exponent, if you don't see a coefficient, it's still there. It's just invisible. And that number is always going to be 1. Whenever you don't see a coefficient, it's like we're multiplying the y by the number 1, where nothing would change. But sometimes that does make a difference. You need to know that that coefficient is 1. It's going to be a big deal later in this booklet, okay? So try these next examples on your own. Remember that you need to find the variable, the coefficient, and the exponent. I'll take a second and do that now, and then make sure your answers match mine. Over here in example A, the variable is A. It's just the letter that we see. The coefficient is -4, the number that is being multiplied by that variable. And the exponent is the little number up top, that is 3. In question B, this one's a little bit tricky, but remember your rules for if the coefficient or if the exponent is invisible, right? If you don't see an exponent, that means the exponent is 1. And if you don't see a coefficient, that means the coefficient is 1. So here, the variable is b, the coefficient is 1, and the exponent is also 1. Okay, that's it for that lesson. Take some time to complete the homework. It shouldn't take you too long. It's just stating the variable coefficient and exponent again. And as usual, if you have any questions, please make sure to let me know. Thank you.